Hello and welcome to another edition of Remy's Rave for the Day. I'm your host, Remy, or better known as Remington Affrey, the youth minister at the Meadows Church of Christ right here in Beaumont in the great state of Texas. The word that we're going to be raving about today is the word peace. Peace is the word that we're going to be raving about today. When you do a New Testament search, you do a count by book of the word peace. The book that comes in first place is the book of Luke. Luke records the word peace 13 times. That's 13 times for the Gospel of Luke when it comes to how many times does the word peace occur. What comes in second place is the book of Romans. Romans records the word peace 11 times. 11 times for the book of Romans for the word peace. And the book that comes in third place is the book of Ephesians. Ephesians records peace 8 times. But as Bible students, we get a little bit deeper and we ask the question, where does peace occur the most in a book that has a few chapters in it? Where does this word occur the most in a book that has a few chapters in it? And the book of Ephesians comes in fourth place as compared to 2nd John, 3rd John, and even the book 2nd Thessalonians. We get a little bit deeper. We do a count by chapter. That's every chapter in the New Testament. And when you do that type of a search, Ephesians chapter 2 comes in first place, coming in at 4 times. But also Matthew chapter 10 records the word peace at 4 times. So we dive a little bit deeper and we ask the question, where does this word occur the most in a chapter that has a few verses in it? Where does it occur the most? In a chapter that has a few verses in it, and Ephesians chapter 2 is the winner. At 5.1% of the time, it records the word peace. So we focus our attention to Ephesians chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, grab them. We'll make a couple of points and we'll jump to other different books as far as look at the other different cross references, the things that Paul most likely is also alluding to, what he has said before to a different group of people and a different circumstances. But I think the principle will all still run the same. But for starters, let's go to Ephesians chapter 2. Let's start in verse 11 and notice how this word peace is used in Ephesians chapter 2. Let's start in verse 11. It says, therefore, remember that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, the Jews, which is performed in the flesh by human hands. He says, remember that you were at that time separate from Christ. That's Gentiles. Gentiles, verse 12, were excluded from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Verse 13, but now in Christ Jesus, you who were formerly far off, remember, verse 11, Gentiles, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Here comes this word peace coming into play. Verse 14, for he himself, Jesus, back in verse 13, is our peace. Point number one is, Paul says, Jesus is our peace. Look what he did to create peace, verse 14, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. There's a couple of points we got to make mention here. Number one, we just said Jesus is our peace. This is what he did to create peace, who made both groups. Who are these groups? Remember, go back to verse 11. It's those who are the uncircumcision, and then those who are the circumcision. You have Gentiles, and then you have Jews. If you go down to verse number 17, as he's going to mention the word peace again, he says in verse 17, and he came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. Near are the people who are the Jews. Far off, again, Gentiles. So go back to verse 14. Those two groups, it says, they were brought into oneness, into unity, because Jesus broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. Jesus is our peace. And then what did he do to create this peace? How did he become our peace? Well, verse 15, right? by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two. Remember what he said back in verse 14? Who made both groups into one, says the exact same thing. Verse 15, so that in himself he might make the two, Gentile and Jew, into one new man, thus establishing peace. So we have Jesus, you're the peace, you're our peace. This is how you created peace between Jew and Gentile, by getting rid of the law of Moses, because it was this dividing wall. It was this barrier. It's the thing that separated Jews from everybody else. Because, verse 13, the blood of Christ brought those Gentiles to Jesus, brought them to him, all because of the blood. He abolished that going to the cross, and there he has peace, or therefore the Jews and Gentiles, they have peace. They're supposed to have peace. Verse 16, and might reconcile them, Jew and Gentile, both into one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. What was the enmity? Back in verse 15, he mentioned that word again, and he says, he defines it for us, the law of commandments contained in ordinances. He got rid of that, removed it. This is pretty cool here. He's mentioned groups, both groups, but notice back in verse 14, he says one, he brought both groups into one. He says in verse 15, he might make himself the two into one new man. Verse 16, he might reconcile them both into one body. Do you see the pattern there? Do you see the symbolic, not the symbolic, but the synonymous terms that are being used there? One body, one man, all because Jesus went to the cross. And then verse 17, and he, Jesus, who is our peace, came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. Jesus is our peace. This is how he brought about peace, and he also proclaimed peace. But what was so peaceful about his message? I think it's a good question to ask. If we're going to say, and the text's going to say, he preached peace to Gentiles and Jews, well, what was so peaceful about the message that he preached? Well, I think you can go back to the idea of this, verse 16. He reconciled them. Isn't that a peaceful message? That there is no more dividing wall between them. There's no division. And therefore there could be peace in that relationship. Could we not also go back to verse 15 where he says he made the two groups into one new man? Isn't it one new man? Isn't that concept peaceful? What if you go back all the way to verse 12 of chapter 2? Separate from Christ, but now you're not separate. You were excluded, but now you're not. You were strangers, but now you're not. You had no hope, but you do have hope now. You were without God in the world, but not now. You do have God. Isn't that peaceful? Isn't that a peaceful message? And that is why Paul says in verse 14, Jesus is our peace. But here's what's really cool as we go outside of Ephesians chapter 2, because remember when I mentioned all those different searches and how all those different books were brought up when it came to this word peace? Well, it's because I think there's also something significant to that, something I want to explore just really quickly, because it may seem like a contradiction when it says in verse 14, Jesus, you are our peace. But in Matthew chapter 10, when we did a count by chapter, how many times does the word peace occur in all the chapters of the New Testament? We said Ephesians chapter 2 comes in at 4 times. But there's another chapter in the New Testament that also comes in at 4 times, and it's Matthew chapter 10, and how peace is being used there, again, can seem very contradicting to what Paul says in chapter 2, verse 14. So let's flip in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 10. Let's clear this up here. Matthew chapter 10. And notice in verse 34, Matthew 10, verse 34, it says, do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. This is Jesus talking. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. But yet Paul says in chapter 2, verse 14 of Ephesians, Jesus says, you are our peace. But Jesus says, I didn't come here to bring peace, but a sword. Seems like a contradiction. until you consider the context, so important to the Bible, to the gospel message. So what is Jesus really referring to? Well, I think you need to go back to verse 13 and 14 of chapter 10. You go back to chapter 10, 13 and 14. Notice what it says. Jesus still talking here. If the house is worthy, give it to your blessing of peace. But if it is not worthy, take back your blessing of peace. Verse 14, whoever does not receive you nor heed your words as you go out of that house or that city, shake the dust off your feet. Talking about Jesus is commissioning his followers to go out, preach the gospel, preach to the lost sheep of Israel. And this is what you are to do if they do not receive you. Give them a blessing of peace. They don't receive you, don't give them a blessing of peace. Jesus says, basically, going back down to verse 34, when he says, I've come into this world not to give peace, but a sword. In other words, Jesus says the things in which I am going to teach, the New Testament, the New Covenant, it's going to divide. The gospel is going to divide. But Jesus here says that he came here proclaiming peace to those who were far off and to those who are near. And the people who he's preaching to, they themselves are going to let that peaceful message divide them. They're going to let the Prince of Peace divide them and create that message as if it's not peaceful. But Paul says, no, it's peaceful. It's a peaceful message. Because you can go back to the very beginning of Ephesians Chapter 2 and notice what God has done to us. I think it's about verse 5, 6, and 7 of Ephesians chapter 2. He has made us alive together with him. He has raised us up with him. He has seated us with him at the right hand of God in the heavenly places. Isn't that a peaceful message? But there's going to be people who don't view it that way. And Jesus says, because of that, the gospel is going to divide. It's going to be a sword. But here's what's really cool. As he's preaching this message of peace, you notice back in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 15, because he is our peace, he preached that peaceful message. People can understand that peaceful message, and when they do, when they obey it, they can have a peaceful relationship with one another. That's what he says in verse 15. He established his peace, he did, between Jew and Gentile by going to the cross, tearing down that barrier dividing wall. And Paul, not just in chapter 2 of Ephesians, has been saying that about this idea of living in peace with one another. Follow this trend with me. Go to, not Ephesians, but go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Notice this. Chapter 5, verse 13. Notice this. And that you esteem them very highly in love because of their work. He's talking about those people mentioning in verse 12, those who diligently labor among you. Then he says in verse 13, live in peace with one another. Granted, the context is different, but isn't the principle still the same? This idea of living in peace with one another, that's what Paul was trying to tell them in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 15. Jesus is our peace, and because he's our peace, he has established peace between Jew and Gentile. Jew and Gentile live in peace with one another. Let's follow this other trend. Romans chapter 8. Notice this. He's still on this trend here about living in peace. Romans chapter 8, and notice verse number 6. Romans chapter 8, verse 6. These are people who are already Christians because they have the Spirit already dwelling within inside of them. Chapter 8, verse 6. For the mindset on the flesh is death, but the mindset on the Spirit is life. And notice this, and peace. So those who have the Spirit dwelling within inside of them, they're focused on peace. That's what they're focused on. It's no more this idea of, hey, we had the law of Moses first, nana, boo-boo type of a thing. Gentiles, you weren't chosen in the first place. Paul says there should be none of that no more. You guys should have a peaceful relationship now. Let's continue in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Notice verse 18. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. Same thing. He says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. You know why you can be at peace with all men? Because Jesus is your peace. At least he's supposed to be the peace of your lives because of what he did through the cross. He got rid of that barrier wall, the law of Moses, that separated people, that separated nations. Live in peace with one another. Go to chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse 17. Chapter 14, verse 17 of Romans. He says, for the kingdom of God is not eating and drinking. Remember, this is the context where you had that weak and strong brother. Maybe this weak brother believed in this, but the strong brother didn't believe in those things. They weren't convicted by those same convictions. Paul says, don't be a stumbling block. Don't set yourself as a judge. And then he says, verse 17, the kingdom of God is not of eating and drinking, but righteousness and peace. There it is. And joy in the Holy Spirit. Go down to verse 19 of chapter 14. So then we pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. He's talking to Jew and Gentiles here. Weak and strong brothers. But this is a Jew-Gentile church in Rome. Live in peace with one another because Jesus is your peace. Now this is pretty cool too. Let's go back to Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 4, verse number 3. Ephesians chapter 4, verse number 3. It's in the middle of a thought here, but the principle is still the same. Chapter 4, verse 3 of Ephesians. He says, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit, look at that, in the bond of peace. Telling this Jew and Gentile church in the city of Ephesus, not Rome, but in Ephesus, he says, look, you're in unity with the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, when you're at peace with one another. The church can be in unity. The church can be in unity with the Spirit whom is dwelling within inside of y'all. Y'all can have peace because of that. And the only reason why you have peace, why you can have that peace between one another, Jew and Gentile, is because Jesus is your peace. According to chapter 2, verse 14, he is your peace because of what he did through the cross, verse 15. And then in verse 17, Ephesians chapter 2, because of what he did on the cross, we can even say even before and even still afterwards, as far as his apostles going out and preaching a peaceful message. And the peaceful message was this, that Gentiles, that's you and I, by the way, Gentiles, you're no longer strangers to the covenant of promise. You now have hope. You now can have God. You now, what does it say back in verse number 12? You are now with Christ. You now belong to him. You don't have to be separate from him. You're no longer excluded. That's a peaceful message. And because that's a peaceful message, anybody who responds to that kind of a message should be able to have peace with one another because Jesus is our Prince of Peace. That's why we're raving about this word peace today. Lord willing, or Lord knows it, we do need peace in the world because of what is going on in this world, but he is our peace. We've got to make him the peace of our lives so that we can have peace with one another and be able to spread that message of peace. Again, this is why we're raving again for Remy's Rave of the Day. We're raving about the word peace, episode 38. Please consider liking and sharing this video as well as liking and sharing our page. We do this every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday around 3 p.m. unless something comes up. We're raving about a word. We're raving about a phrase. Maybe we're raving about a simple message, a simple lesson, and we want to share it with you. We want to shed some hidden gems. And again, the reason why I say hidden gems is because I'm not saying that as if the Bible never says it, but sometimes, unfortunately, we just make the mistake of, as we're reading, as we're studying, we just don't really open our eyes. We don't pay attention, or we forgot what we read back in chapter 8, and maybe the author is still in his same thought, and he's in a different chapter. Maybe it's chapter 10, maybe it's chapter 11. And so there just needs to be somebody who unlocks these quote-unquote hidden gems to say, look how the Bible's cool. Look how it's fascinating. Look how it's thought-provoking. Look how it's something to rave about because it has all these beautiful connections within itself. And again, this is why words, every word in the Bible is purposeful, it's significant. God said it for a reason, and it's up to us as His church, as His people. We got to unlock, we got to figure out, we got to investigate, we got to search why God chose certain words in a certain book, in a certain chapter, in a certain context, and those kinds of words were told to certain people. We got to be able to figure that out, and that's why we're raving about these words and phrases. Again, episode 38, raving about the word peace. Please consider liking and sharing this video, as well as liking and sharing our page. Trying to bring out a lot of content, letting people know we're here. We are the Meadows Church of Christ right here in Beaumont in the great state of Texas. Please come visit us at 9195 Dishman Road, 9195 Dishman Road. Please come worship with us on Sunday mornings at 9:30 a.m., Bible class at 11 a.m. We meet back on Sunday evenings at 5 p.m. and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. Let me give you a couple of shout outs. We are going to be having a men's breakfast tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. It's going to be a great breakfast with a great message. It's great for all men of the congregation. Also, visitors, come. We're going to have plenty of food and everything like that. It's great for men to be together and to equip one another, to lean upon each other, to get through this world together. And so that is tomorrow at 8 a.m. at the Meadows Church of Christ building, but also about 2 weeks from Saturday, about tomorrow, around June 5th. It's going to be on June 5th, around 10 a.m. We're going to have a car wash. We're going to have our youth kids go to a church camp in Arkansas. And so come by the building. We're going to squeaky clean your car. And so there's going to be also some links there. Maybe you can buy a link if you want to. They're going to be $1 a piece. And man, what better way to see your car getting squeaky clean as you're eating link? It's going to be great food there. And so please come by on June 5th around 10 a.m. the Meadows Church of Christ building. Stop by and have your car squeaky clean on that day. Again, I've been your host, Remy, or better known as Remington Affrey, youth minister at the Meadows Church of Christ right here in Beaumont in the great state of Texas. Continue, have a great rest of your day. Be safe out there. More rain is expected to come this weekend. Continue to have a great rest of your week. And Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow around 10 a.m. for the morning seed. But also next week, Lord willing, Tuesday at 3 p.m. We'll do it all over again with Remy's Rave of the Day. Godspeed.